that one of the biggest problems that I've seen over the years is I think all of us try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and that doesn't work. We literally have to become somebody else.
Welcome back to Change Your Mind, Change Your Life. I'm Jim.
And I'm Lynn.
Bringing you uncommon solutions for common problems. Life is an adventure. Come and walk with us today.
And today we are having a real adventure. The name of our show today, How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One, is taken from the title of our guest's latest best-selling book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One. This book actually became the #1 book in self-help and personal development on Amazon.com the week after it came out. There's a very natural synergy between the techniques and goals we use in hypnotherapy and Dr. Joe Dispenza's scientific findings.
Dr. Joe is an expert on the brain, mind, and human potential. He has spent decades studying the human mind, how it works and stores information, and why it perpetuates the same behavioral patterns over and over. He draws on both scientific and universal principles to deliver practical tools and techniques that empower people truly to change from the inside out, and so change the results in their life.
We wondered if you could set things up for our listeners by telling us why you decided to write Breaking the Habit.
Well, I think when people saw What the Bleep Do We Know, and they read my first book, Evolve Your Brain, and probably a lot of different books out there that really, investigate the new science of quantum physics and neuroscience and epigenetics and neuroplasticity. I think this is a time in history where people not only want to know, but they want to know how. So the feedback that we got from a lot of our readers and subscribers were, well, we get it, but now how do we do it? How do we change our minds? So Breaking the Habit is really the companion book to Evolve, and it really is a way, first of all, to demystify the mystical concept of meditation and to use science really as the language to do that, so that people can begin to apply this some of these principles to their life and see measurable changes. So it's a how-to book, and it hopefully gives people the tools to begin to use on a day-to-day basis.
I say, what is the central message of the book?
Well, the central message is really simple. It says that your personality creates your personal reality. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality, the present person who's listening to this show as a personality, has created the present personal reality called their life. Which means then, if you want to create a new personal reality, then on a fundamental level, you're going to have to change some thoughts that you think, some behaviors or habits that you demonstrate, and some emotions that you've memorized that's become part of your destiny. And I think that one of the biggest problems that I've seen over the years is I think all of us try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and that doesn't work. We literally have to become somebody else.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. That's something we run into all the times. Clients that have, I love saying that it's memorized emotions. They play those emotions out in the same situation over and over again, even when they're self-defeating. And we help them to learn how to create a new reality in their mind. Mentioning that movie, that What the Bleep Do We Know, we saw that, and that was so great for people listening that didn't see that. If you get the opportunity, watch it. I was sitting in a dark movie theater with a little notepad scribbling notes through that whole movie. Could barely read them later, but it was really great. You mentioned in the first few chapters that to change is to be greater than your environment, greater than your body, and greater than time. And I wonder if you can explain what that means to our listeners, if that's
Sure.
not too big a question.
Let's just say that we believe that in some way our thoughts have something to do with our destiny. Let's believe that our thoughts somehow create our life. Well, if we wake up in the morning and we get out of bed on the same side and we use the toilet like we always do, and then look in the mirror to remember who we are, and then wash ourselves off in the same routine ways, and then drink coffee out of our favorite mug, the same amount with the same amount of sweetener, and we drive to work the same way, and then we do the things that we've memorized and do so well, and we see the same people that push the same emotional buttons. We could say then it's the external environment that's turning on different circuits in our brain that are causing us to think equal to everything that we know in our life, everything that's familiar to us. So it begs the question, does the environment control your thinking, or does your thinking control your environment? Well, as long as you're going to the same place and seeing the same people and doing the same things that create the same experiences, that reaffirm the same emotions, that reaffirm the same personality, then it's the external environment that's controlling how you think and feel. And as long as you're thinking equal to everything that you know, you could only create more of the same in your life. Now, the quantum model of reality is still applying, but you're observing reality from the same level of mind. And as long as you, as the quantum observer, are observing the same reality from the same circuitry in your brain, you will keep reaffirming and recreating the same life. Now, the change then is to think greater than the environment, to be greater than the circumstances in your life, to be greater than the conditions in your world. And every person in history that changed the course of history, whether it was the Wright brothers or Madame Curie or William Wallace or Gandhi, they all had a vision or an idea that was greater than their present reality. And they were so infatuated and so possessed by this idea, this vision, that they began to live as if that future reality was already happening. In other words, they weren't using their senses to define reality. They were creating a reality ahead of their senses, and they understood that their senses should be the last to experience that their mind, what their mind has created. So it begs the question, can we believe in a future that we can't see or experience with our senses yet? But we've thought about enough times in our mind that our brain is literally changed to look like the event has already happened. Now, the neuroscientific model of reality says that's absolutely possible, because the privilege of being a human being is that we can make thoughts more real than anything else. And by the same means, can we emotionally embrace some future potential that already exists in the quantum field and begin to fall in love with that destiny to such an extent that the body, as the unconscious mind, begins to believe that it's in that future reality in the present moment, so much so that it begins to signal new genes in new ways, and it begins to change the body to look like the event has already happened. Now, when the brain and body are physically changed to look like the event has already happened, the brain and body are no longer a record of the past, but now, in fact, a map to the future. So to change to be greater than the environment means then that we have to be greater than everything familiar and predictable in our life, and that we have to wire that information neurologically and emotionally condition the body to be ahead of the environment, to be ahead of our time.
We all hear that change is hard to make. Why is it so hard to change? And can you explain the process of change?
Sure. Well, the process of change requires unlearning and relearning. It requires breaking the habit of the old self and reinventing a new self. It requires what we say in neuroscience, pruning synaptic connections and then sprouting new connections. It requires unmemorizing an emotion that's been existing in the body and then reconditioning the body to a new mind or to a new emotion. It requires moving from the past and beginning to live in the future. Now, the reason that it's so hard to change is that most people don't understand is that every time you have a thought, you make a chemical. You have a great thought or a joyful thought, you turn on a set of circuits in your brain that fire in a very specific sequence and pattern and combination that begins to produce a chemical in another part of the brain, begins for you to feel exactly the way you were just thinking, great or joyful. If you have a negative thought or an unhappy thought, you turn on a different set of circuits in your brain and a different sequence, pattern, or combination to produce a different level of mind that begins to signal another part of the brain to make a different blend of chemicals for you to begin to feel exactly the way you were just thinking, which is negative or unhappy. Now, the moment we begin to feel the way we think, because the brain is in constant communication with the body, we begin to think the way we feel, which makes more chemicals for us to feel the way we think the way we feel, and feel the way we think. And this cycle of thinking and feeling for certain people goes on for 20 or 30 years. And the redundancy of that cycle over time conditions the body to memorize that emotion as well as the conscious mind. Now, once the body knows as well as the mind, we're in a habit. A habit is when the body is the mind. Now, 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old, this is a fact, is a set of memorized behaviors and emotional reactions, a set of beliefs and perceptions that literally are functioning like an automatic program behind the scenes of our awareness subconsciously. So now the person is going to try to change, but they've been thinking and feeling negative thoughts for the last 20 years. And it's become a state of being for them. And a state of being is when mind and body are working together and thoughts and feelings are aligned. So now they're going to try to think positively, but they've been feeling negatively for the last 20 years. And change requires then to get into the operating system and make those changes in the subconscious.
That's really, this is really exciting to hear you say this, because you're giving scientific reasons to our listeners for the things that we do every day. People come in with one thing that we teach people is that their subconscious can't tell the difference between what they imagine and what's real, which is really what you're talking about. They have memorized those emotions, and we also tell them that every thought is connected to an emotion, which you just explained as a chemical, and that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to help people to overcome negative thinking, create new thoughts, and help them to see themselves as their future self, to begin to become that reality. I don't know if you agree but to me that we seem to be saying the same thing. Do you think that's so?
Well, think of the subconscious mind as a programmable computer program. Think of it like a tape recording. And we write these automatic programs, we write these automatic tapes, and then we try to change them with our conscious mind. And trying to change them with our conscious mind would be like when the program is running, you yelling at the computer program saying stop. It doesn't change the program. Right. You have to get into the operating system in order to do that. Now, most people then, when they go about the process of change, they typically try to create a new life, a new future, create something about being thinner or wealthier or more in love or whatever it is. But they never look at their old self. Now, the word meditation literally means to become familiar with. So if you begin to become familiar with those unconscious thoughts that have been happening behind the scenes of your awareness and bring them to conscious awareness, you begin to notice your habits and behaviors, and you begin to become conscious of them, and you begin to become familiar with those emotions that bring you to a lower denominator. The moment you become conscious of those unconscious or subconscious states, what you're really saying is, I'm not going to let these thoughts, behaviors, or emotions slip by my awareness to cause me to return back to the old self. Now, the process of change requires becoming so familiar with the old self that you would never go unconscious again. Now we can rewrite the program because we just cleared the program. Now we just eliminated the program, and we can say, what thoughts do you want to think? What behaviors do you want to demonstrate? And what emotions do you want to live by? And if you said, let the thought that you're thinking become the experience, then from a neuroscientific and biological standpoint, we can change the brain and body literally by thought alone, so that now the person gets up as a new state of being.
That's so exciting. It's remarkable when you see how quickly people could change when they do that. You were talking about meditation. Most people think meditation is about thinking nothing, completely emptying their mind. You're talking about actually doing work in your mind in meditation?
Well, I don't know how much time we have to answer this question. Do I have 5 minutes to answer it, or shall we take a break?
No, actually, let's do that I've gotten so carried away listening to you, I've forgotten about commercial breaks, so thank you for the reminder. Yeah, that would be a good thing to come back to.
Well, when you and I are living by the hormones of stress, when we are reacting to our environmental conditions, when we are reacting to different people at different times in different places, those chemicals of stress knock the brain and body out of balance. And when we are living in that emergency state, our awareness is defining reality through our senses. In other words, we become materialists. We put all of our attention on our bodies. We put all of our attention on conditions in our environment, and we begin to obsess about it. Now, when we live by the body, the environment, and time, we reaffirm our identity based on those addictive emotions to remember who we think we are. Now, that's a state of emergency. That's a state of survival. And we feel disconnected from possibility. In other words, those emotions alter us, and they create the states of anger and aggression and fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and depression and hopelessness and powerlessness and greed and envy and jealousy. All of those emotions are driven by the chemicals of stress. When we move into a meditative state, we literally change the brain from functioning from the hindbrain to more of the forebrain. The frontal lobe begins to take control, and the frontal lobe acts like a volume control. It begins to lower the volume to the circuits in the brain that are processing the body, the environment, and time. We literally begin to become nobody. We become no thing. We become no time. And in this state of creation, where we are forgetting about ourself in relationship as an identity to different people in our life and the problems that we have and the things that we do and the place that we live, the circuits in all parts of the brain that function as an identity, the lights go out there. Now, the moment that happens, you become pure consciousness. That's the moment when you forget about yourself, where you have that pause or that nothing. And in that moment, is the moment that you have access to potentials in the quantum field. You begin to become connected to possibility. You're no longer trying to force or control the outcome. You're in the midst of that moment where you are feeling so connected to possibility that you trust in the outcome. Now, this is the moment where, in a state of pure consciousness, you can begin to design a new destiny. So a lot of times it takes clearing the chalkboard off first before we design something. Now, if a person has been thinking and feeling in the same way for 20 or 30 years and it's created a state of being, say insecurity or say fear, the moment they forget about themselves and there's a physical change that takes place in the brain, they're no longer thinking the same thoughts that are producing the same feelings and emotions that are activating certain hormones and energy centers that have to do with digestion or power and control or sexual identity. All those centers are turned off. When that happens, the energy begins to move out of those centers right up into the heart. We begin to fall in love with possibility. We want the moment to begin to become elongated. We're so present in that moment that we're no longer trying to predict the future based on the past. We're so completely present that we're enjoying what we're creating. Now, I call that the natural state of being. Now, a lot of people, when they reach that point where they're nobody, no thing, no time, there's an elevation of energy. They feel lifted because the body is freed from the chains of that emotional state. And the body is literally liberated, and we go from being more materialist to more possibility-oriented thinkers. This is the moment where I say, now that you've cleaned the board, you have available energy now to create with. So meditation takes us to that neutral point, but once we reach that neutral point, now let's begin to design a new mind. Let's begin to recondition the body to a new mind. Let's get up as a new personality, as a new state of being, and let's begin to rewrite those programs.
You mentioned a new mind. You also refer to human beings as having three brains. Allow us to go through thinking about being. Most of us have enough trouble with the concept of one brain. What do you mean by three brains?
Right. You just explained some of that, but our listeners may not understand the concept of having three different brains. If you could amplify that a little bit.
Sure. We have three different brains that have three different anatomical structures that have their own concept of time, own concept of space, and their own chemical makeup. Now, the first brain is called your thinking brain, or your neocortex. That's the walnut-shaped, corrugated brain that you see typically that has all the folds and valleys. And we're speaking right now by using our neocortex. Now, every time you learn something new, you make a new connection in your thinking brain. That's what learning is. Learning is forging new connections in your brain. Remembering is being able to maintain and sustain those connections. So you read a book on success. You read a book on how to ride a bicycle. You read a book on how to dance the salsa. You read a book on how to sew a quilt. You read a book on compassion or forgiveness. You read a book on patience and becoming a good parent. Now, all of that information is stored in your thinking neocortex, the seat of your conscious awareness. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with all that knowledge? Now, if you take that information that you understood philosophically or theoretically or intellectually, if you took all that knowledge and you applied it, or you personalized it, or you demonstrated it, would mean that you would have to modify your behavior in some way and do something differently. Now, when your behaviors match your intentions, or your actions are equal to your thoughts, the moment you align your mind and body, you're going to have a new experience. And when you have a new experience, you activate the second brain, called the chemical brain, or the limbic brain, or the emotional brain, or the midbrain. So now, you read the book on compassion and forgiveness, and you're walking around in your life, and you're thinking about it, and you're reviewing it in your mind, and you're contemplating it. And as you keep contemplating it, you're reinforcing the circuits that you've learned, and you're beginning to install a new mind. Now, the moment you begin to apply it now, let's say that all of a sudden you got invited to a company party, and at the company party you found out that your worst enemy is going to be there, the person that betrayed you and turned you in for something that you didn't do and misrepresented you. And you hear that this person's going to be at the party, and you're driving in your car, and you pull over on the side of the road, and you think about how you're going to choke this person and what you're going to say to them and how you're feeling, and all of a sudden you have all these reactions. And the moment you catch yourself, and you become conscious of those unconscious states, and you begin to restrain those thoughts, those behaviors and emotions, nerve cells that no longer fire together no longer wire together. You're literally cooling off mind and body that's connected to the old self, and you biologically begin to change by breaking apart those circuits in your brain and by no longer signaling the same genes emotionally. And as you begin to say, what did I learn in this book? And you say, oh gosh, it says to be present. It says to no longer hold the person to the past. And you go through this list of things that you learned, and as you begin to put yourself into the equation and you begin to mentally rehearse how you are going to be when you walk into this party, and you begin to think about the thoughts you do want to think, and you begin to plan the behaviors you are going to demonstrate, and you begin to think about how you do want to feel, you're making your brain fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. And as you review who you do want to be, nerve cells that fire together wire together. You begin to install the neurological hardware in your brain ahead of the actual experience. You just installed a new mind. The hardware now is going to create software. So now you get into the party and you do exactly what the book says. You get your actions equal to your thoughts, your mind and body working together, and you have this new experience. And the moment you begin to feel compassion or feel forgiveness or feel love, and you do exactly what the book says to do, you're beginning to teach your body to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. You see, knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And the moment you begin to feel compassion and feel forgiveness, you're beginning to chemically instruct your body to understand what your mind has intellectually understood, and you're beginning to embody knowledge. The word is becoming flesh, but it's not enough to do it once. You have to be able to do it over and over again. You have to repeat that experience so many times that you neurochemically condition your body to memorize forgiveness and compassion as well as your conscious mind. And if you do something repeatedly over and over and over again, you activate that third brain called the cerebellum, the seat of the subconscious. And when you get to that point where you have neurochemically memorized an internal order, that no person, no thing, no experience can remove you from it. When you're in that state of being, that's when mind and body are one. And when you have that type of internal order, then we could say then you are now being greater than your environment. And this is how skills and habits and propensities are developed. And so we can go from thinking to doing to being, and when we get to that state of being, it's innate in us. We don't have to think about it any longer. It's who we are. And the quantum field responds to who we're being, not just what we're thinking or not what we're feeling, but the combination of our thoughts and feelings, who we're being.
That's so informative and so easy to understand when you put it in context like that.
Dr. Joe, in one chapter you discussed different brain waves that happen when we are truly in our meditative state. Can you demystify the inner journey even further?
Sure. With the latest research now that's being done with functional brain scans and electroencephalographs, we have such amazing information about when we're in a meditative state, and when we're not. Now, when we're all sitting around listening to this show and our attention is on the outer world, our brainwave patterns, because of the neocortex functioning at such a high degree, is really pretty much processing what's called beta wave patterns. Now, in beta, because the outer world is more real than the inner world, the brain's function is to create meaning between what's going on in the outer world in comparison to what's going on in the inner world. It's trying to create coherence between the inner and outer worlds. And as we put all our attention on our external environment and we use our senses to do that, the neocortex perks up and it has to process if we're sitting down, if we're digesting food, if we're listening, if we're surfing on the computer while they're listening, if we're driving our car. Now, the moment we close our eyes and we begin to eliminate all the sensory information that's coming from the external environment, and sight is pretty much 80% of our stimulation, sensory-wise, and we begin to fill the room with music and no ambient sounds can be heard, the brain naturally is processing less information, and so the neocortex tends to slow down and it moves into a state of alpha. Now, in alpha, the inner world is more real than the outer world. In other words, our attention tends to go within. Now, without a doubt, when we are analyzing our life and we're thinking about how to resolve problems, as we do this, we're using beta wave thinking, and beta keeps us in our conscious mind. And in order for us to resolve the issues in our life, we have to switch into a state of alpha, because if we're thinking and analyzing our problems, we're actually moving further away from the operating system of the subconscious, because the conscious mind is separated by the subconscious mind by what's called the analytical mind. So if you pictured a circle, and the very top of the circle was 5% of the circle, and then the very bottom of the circle was 95% of the circle, and there was a line dividing that 5% to the 95%. That line that separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. And so people tend to analyze their problems, analyze themselves, and as they're analyzing, they're driving their brain further into their beta wave patterns or their thinking patterns. And so in the book, we talk about ways to slow down the thinking brain so that we can enter into the operating system where we can make those changes in the habits and behaviors that we've developed over the years. And only when we get beyond the analytical mind is when we can really make true changes.
I'm wondering now that you've made so much of this clear to us, if you could give us some examples of one or two examples of people that have made this type of change in their lives and the results of it.
Sure. I mean, we have, in the workshops that we do pretty much around the world, we have seen people heal themselves of many different health conditions, from cancer to MS to lupus to thyroid conditions to chronic pain to depression to insomnia. And people that have these changes, they followed the same exact process that we've been talking about. They sat down and they said, okay, what emotion am I living by that keeps signaling the same gene that keeps causing me to reaffirm my same health condition? And so a person may say, one man in particular was diagnosed with cancer, And after several different therapies, cancer kept coming back until he finally said, okay, let me become aware of my states of mind and body. And he left his familiar life and took a vacation to Mexico for about 10 days. And he said to himself, what emotion do I live by every day that keeps me the same person? He became conscious of the fact that every day of his life, he lived in a state of resentment. And when he became aware of that, he said, now what thoughts do I think when I feel resentful? And he listed all of those thoughts. He took hours, and he began to write every thought down that was connected to that state of resentment. In other words, what thoughts are driven by that emotion? And he sat down, and he reviewed every one of those and became familiar with every single thought that was driven by that state of resentment. And then when he got very clear and reminded himself how he no longer wanted to think, he surrendered these thoughts to a greater mind and asked it to resolve it in a way that was right for him. Next day he comes out and he begins to review his behaviors and his actions and his habits, what he says out loud in his life when he feels resentment. And as he begins to observe himself in his life, and he begins to become familiar with all of those physical demonstrations related to resentment, he reviews that list until he says, not one of these behaviors will go by unnoticed by me again. In other words, I'm going to become so conscious of this state of being that I will never return back to the old self. And he reviewed that list until he became complete. Now, the next day he goes out and he begins to look at what other emotions he actually feels when he feels that particular. And he says, oh my gosh, I feel judgmental, I feel competitive, I feel frustrated, impatient. And he begins to look at himself in his life and begins to become familiar with all of the other emotions that are derived from that emotional state. And he reviews those emotions and reminds himself who he no longer wants to be. And he does this over and over again for about 5 days. Now, what he didn't know he was doing at the time is that he was inhibiting the old thoughts and the old states of mind and body, the old behaviors, the old emotions. And in time, by around the 5th day, all of a sudden he started to feel really happy. In other words, he was literally neurologically pruning those circuits in his brain and biologically no longer signaling the same genes. And after around 5 days, his body was breaking free from those addictive states of mind and body. And when that happened, the body was liberated from the chains of some of those emotions, some of those behaviors. And the body began to liberate energy. The particle went to the wave. And all of a sudden, he started to feel so good. He started to think about who he was going to be when he returned in his life, how he was going to think, how he was going to act. And he began to think about how he was going to feel and how he was going to demonstrate it. He literally began to rewrite the circuits in his brain and recondition his body to a new mind. And he walked back into his life 5 days after that in a new state of being. He was getting ready for the surgery. The day of his surgery, he was in the shower, and a tumor literally fell off his body while he was in the shower. Now, he was a new personality, and a new personality creates a new personal reality, and cancer could not exist in that body any longer. It was connected to somebody else.
Absolutely amazing.
In your book, you have just about 3 more minutes before our break, but in the book you have a chapter called The Gap. What's the gap?
Well, I don't know if I could explain it in 3 minutes, but let me say that most people try to change from the outside in instead of from the inside out. And we reach a point in our life by our 30s or 40s where we can pretty much predict the feeling of anything in our life. And when we reach this point, it becomes the moment that the soul begins to wake up. And it's where we begin to say, I've created this identity, which is how I project myself to the world. And I need my environment to remember who I think I am, the people that I know, the places that I go, the things that I own, the things that I do. But how I really feel inside is who I really am. And so we create this gap between how we appear on the outside and who we really are on the inside. And the division of that gap, Jim, is created by the emotions that we've memorized that's become part of our identity. And so until we begin to look down at that feeling and that emotion and begin to close the gap between how we appear and who we really are, we'll probably spend the rest of our life trying to buy sports cars or boats or get facelifts or join new social clubs and meet new people or go to new places. But then when the novelty of all of those experiences on the outside wear off, we're still left with that feeling. And so true change begins when we begin to look down at that feeling. And for some people, it's called the midlife crisis, but this is the moment where people start to say, I no longer want to do that. I no longer want to be this person. I don't want to keep this facade going. It takes too much energy. I'm going to begin to tell the truth about who I am. And people around them who are doing the same exact thing become threatened, and they say, oh my gosh, he or she is losing her mind. And this is a great moment because this is a moment where true transformation can take place.
So they're really at their turning point there, at a catalyst where they know something needs to change, but they're just about to begin that journey. Is that right?
Exactly.
You mentioned something in your book that's completely foreign to the people that are listening. So I wanted to ask you, before we leave today, to explain what is neuroplasticity and what is epigenetics.
Well, they used to say to us that our brains are hardwired and that for the most part they're unchangeable, that we're going to pretty much live a predetermined reality based on how our brain is wired. But with the advent of functional brain scans and some of the latest research that's being done, neuroplasticity tells us that we're changed by every new thought that we have, every new experience that we embrace, every new choice that we make, every new dream that we dream, every new fantasy that we create. Our brain literally changes to reflect a new level of mind. And so if you're not thinking differently, or if you're not acting differently, or choosing differently, or feeling differently, then the brain stays status quo. But we are marvels of adaptability and plasticity. And because of the latest research, it says that we can change at any point in our life. Now, epigenetics, the scientific model used to say that genes create disease. And we now know that less than 5% of the people on the planet are born with genetic conditions. The other 95% develop their genetic propensities from lifestyle and from choices and emotional states. So now we know that it's the environment, the external environment, that signals the gene that begins to change who we are. Now, epigenetics says that we could literally change our genetic expression from something outside of us. Now, the outside of the cell, which is the inside of the body, is still the external environment of the cell. So as we begin to embrace elevated emotions and we begin to live in a state of love or gratitude, in a state of worthiness, in a state of joy, that new information that's coming to the cell can cause the gene to literally vary in 2,000 different ways without changing the genetic sequence, which means then we're not doomed by our genes, and that some of the epigenetic changes that take place from new emotional states that either come from an experience in our environment or the emotion that we fabricate just by thought alone, by cultivating a new state of mind and body, literally can be passed on for generations. So now we're talking about the gene actually functioning in 2,000 different variations without ever changing the sequence. And think about how many potentials we actually have then.
I'm really glad I asked that question, because you're offering new hope to people that think they're stuck in situations that are unchangeable. You mentioned people that were actually cured of, you mentioned MS. That's something that people have, and they think that this is it. This is who I am, and I'm stuck with this, and there's no cure. There actually is a great deal of hope for people in any situation.
Well, we've had people in our workshops who had MS get up from a meditation, and the feeling that was lost in their leg or their foot completely returned when the meditation was over, because when they moved into an elevated state of emotion, they began to give thanks before the event actually happened, and their body, as their unconscious mind, began to believe that the future reality was happening to them, because the body doesn't know the difference between an experience or an event in your life that creates an emotion and an emotion that you fabricate by thought alone. To the body, it's the unconscious mind that believes it's in the experience. So they literally cultivated a new state of being and signaled new genes in new ways and changed who they were being in a matter of moments.
That's just amazing. I'm so glad that we had you on the show today. Before we have to say goodbye, we want to give you a chance to tell people how they can reach you, your website, about your products, any presentations you have coming up. Please
Sure.
let them know.
Sure. My website is just simply www.drjoedispenza.com, drjoedispenza.com. I pretty much lecture around the world. We do intensive workshops, beginning workshops, and we do what's called progressive workshops or advanced workshops, where we're not only teaching people the model of change, but giving meditations and opportunities to really change something in their body, something in their life, or something in their future. And the new book, as we've been talking about, is called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One. It's on Amazon. We're going to start putting it up on our website this next week. There's products, CDs called The Art of Change, The Reinvention of Self. There's some DVDs as well, Evolve Your Brain. And I think, for the most part, just happy to have the opportunity to contribute in some way.
Well, you've certainly contributed so much, and we really appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank
That's
you
it
very
for
much.
today's show. Thank you for joining us on Change Your Mind, Change Your Life, and for the opportunity to bring you uncommon solutions to common problems.
Dr. Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you very,
Thank you very
much.
Okay, guys, have a great day, and thank you for your time.
What will you do? Will you continue on the same road with its potholes, dead ends, and detours? Or will you choose to dance down a new road? Life is an adventure. Walk with us and be happy. Call us toll-free at 800-983-1910. That's 800-983-1910. And visit our website at www.bayareahypnotherapy.com. Don't wait. Bay Area Hypnotherapy is located in downtown San Francisco at 870 Market Street, Suite 615. Bart and Muni stop right at the door. Call 800-983-1910 or visit us online at bayareahypnotherapy.com.